Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, welcome everybody. My name's Kathleen, and I work at Anderson's Bookshop in Downers Grove. And I want to welcome you all to this evening's event. I think that this is going to be, like I said, I've been looking forward to this. JoAnne's book has. I've been chomping at the bit to get my hands on it. And unfortunately, I was not fortunate enough to get an advance copy. So I have to wait, like you all have to wait to get your hands on this book. But I know that we are not going to be disappointed at all. So tonight we are going to have the hostess with the mostest, Miss Candy Purdom, who's also one of my coworkers at Anderson's Bookshop. And so without further ado, Candy, I am going to hand it over to you. Oh, I did forget one little housekeeping thing. Again, everybody, we're going to just have you keep your cameras off and keep yourselves muted during the presentation. If you do have questions, go ahead and drop them into the chat. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll come back and we'll have a nice little Q&A with JoAnne and all of you. So again, if you have questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that. And I think that is everything I needed to tell you. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the hostess with the mostest, Miss Candy. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kathleen. We're all just thrilled to have JoAnne Tompkins with us tonight. This book is just fantastic. So I do feel fortunate because I did get a chance to read it early. And sorry, Kathleen, that you had to wait and chomp at the bit, but it's fantastic. There's a murder, but somehow there's also a hopeful and loving note that's sort of woven into this story. I've been saying it's heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. It's just, it has so many layers and I just loved it. I loved it. Two high school buddies meet kind of a troubling end. There's a murder suicide. There's a young woman who's been kind of lost. Her family life leaves a lot to be desired. And she sort of ends up in the middle of this situation. And also at the heart of this really deeply moving story of what creates family. It's happenstance, but it's just a beautiful happenstance. So it's a sad, troubling, there are parts of it that are just really, like I said, heartbreaking, but the characters, the way it's put together, JoAnne, you've done a fantastic job. And I think you're all going to love it. Book clubs, they will just adore this book as well. So I just thought we'd get started and I've got lots of questions and we will enjoy our time together with you, JoAnne. Let's start out with just telling us a little bit about what took you down the writing path. How did this happen to come about?
Well, first of all, I want to just say thank you to Anderson's Bookshop because it's just so wonderful to offer this opportunity to meet with people and talk and for the nice introduction by Kathleen and Candy for you being here. Well, I started writing, it's kind of embarrassing to say this, but many, many, many years ago at a time when I was, I was a trial lawyer and then I was a judicial officer and then I was a mediator for many years. And I was getting kind of tired of that. And I sort of, thought, oh, I'll sit down and write a book. I could write a book, and maybe just whip off a bestseller. That was like 20 years ago, right? And I had like no idea like how difficult it is to write a compelling book and to put how many moving parts there are in novels. So but once I'm a little bit tenacious, that's one reason why I think I was, reasonably successful in my job as a mediator is I didn't care how many times people said no to me, I just kept at them. And sort of the same way with my writing, right? I would write and people would have pretty legitimate criticisms of it and I would just keep writing. And but about in the year 2015, I had retired from my law practice and really thought I either need to commit to this thing or choose something else to focus my life on. And I ended up getting an MFA at that point. And it was then that I started working on this book.
Well, I'm glad you took that little career path turn because it's fantastic. And the fact that you have teenagers at the heart of this, you could have had adults and you chose to focus on the teens. Did that come about because of your prior work as a mediator? I mean, did you work with young people at all?
I did some for sure. I sadly, my career as a mediator ended up focusing very heavily on high trauma cases, and involving a lot of sex abuse cases and even some child torture cases. It was a really, really dark practice. And I dealt with so many adolescents that had been through just incredible trauma and yet come through it, right? And I was so inspired by them and by other people as well. So, but you know what, I just adore adolescence. I adore sort of the fierceness of it and the lifefulness of it and the drama of it. And since my protagonist, Isaac, who is the father of the murder victim, Daniel, he is, he's not in a great place at the beginning of this book. He's kind of withdrawn from life, withdrawn from, he's kind of, I think anyone would probably judge him to be a little depressed. And I love him and I think he's very compelling, but I wanted that burst of adolescence, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit, since this is your debut novel, can you tell us about your publishing journey? I mean, how did you get from the page to the actual book?
Well, again, it is such a journey. And when I finished up my thesis in 2017, it was really well received within my program. And I worked with my advisors and they gave me, some leads to some agents. And from my prior work, had some agents that had looked at some other work I had done and had not taken it, but had said, yeah, but, send me your next stuff, right? So that's for all the writers out there. Just keep that in mind that, even a rejection is not bad. You're getting into somebody's mind, and keep all those contacts. And so when my book was ready, and so after I finished my MFA, I did actually edit again. I sent it out, and my agent, who ended up calling me, and so I sent it to the people who had asked me to send me their next work, and they took the manuscript. But as a lot of you probably know, agents will sit on it for a while, right? And so I sent it sort of just what the heck to Susan Gollum at Writer's House, because I knew of her and who she had represented and had read wonderful things about her in Poets and Writers, and was just impressed with her willingness to work with debut novelists. And she called me, but I would love to say that she was just like, oh, I adored it and wanted it immediately, but it didn't go that way, right? She said, yeah, it's pretty good. I like it. I think it has potential. Here's my concerns. And she laid them out. And so she said, if you want to do some work on it and send it back to me, I'll take a look at it. So I did. She ended up taking it. And even after that, we worked on it some more, right? She had ideas about further ways to refine the work. So it was probably a year almost from the time that I first talked to Susan that we actually put it out to publishers. Fortunately, when we put it out to publishers, and this is something I really credit my agent for, it was ready to go. So when it got out there, we did have 4 publishers that were kind of on the phone within a few days. And that was so, having written so long, to have that happen, I literally sat in my home that night and thought, am I in a mental institution? Rich, wonderful fantasy, because it just was so hard to believe after all that time.
Right. Well, I think it sounds like, writers would go crazy for this story, because it doesn't always happen that way. Mostly it doesn't.
Right.
So,
No,
wow,
right.
That's fantastic. Well, and fortunately, Riverhead, Penguin Random House, they were smart enough to snatch it up. So that's awesome. Wow, very exciting. Okay, so now we can really sort of dig in a little bit to the book itself without giving any spoilers away. One thing I was so impressed with was the way you could switch narrators from chapters to chapter, and that's difficult to do. So I wondered how you kept that all organized. You did it very well. You did a great job organizing things. The dialogue is fantastic. Maybe you could give us a little introduction of each of the 3 main characters that we come to know in this book: Isaac, Evangeline, and Jacob. Tell us a little bit maybe give a little of their voice so we sort of get
Oh,
introduced
okay.
to them?
Yeah, sure. Well, I do have little snippets of their various voices. But so first is, you meet Isaac, and you'd learn right away that his son has been murdered, and has been murdered by a boy that Isaac considered to be like another son. They were next door neighbors that had been close since the time they were 3. They're 17 at the time this murder happens. And then that boy, Jonah, ends up committing suicide. And that's actually how they find the body of Daniel, is that in a suicide note, Jonah tells them, and I'm not giving anything away here. That's in the first 2 pages of this book. So, so I'm going to read a snippet after that. It's the next time we see Isaac, when he's kind of trying to come to grips with this. And so this is chapter 3. News of my son's death traveled even faster than that of his disappearance. It was a loss felt by our entire community, and made all the more painful by its violent cause, by Jonah's suicide, by Seattle news teams that swooped in to sensationalize. Many in town speculated about girls and jealousies, drug deals and psychotic breaks, but not one fact surfaced that lent the slightest credibility to any of it. The need for public outlets of grief was intense. Within the week, a student memorial was held in the school's overflowing gym. This was followed a few days later by a Catholic mass filled to capacity. Mourners packed even in the vestibule. Catherine had insisted upon the mass. Though Daniel never considered himself Catholic, I didn't object. Catherine, who had divorced me the year before, grieved as deeply as I did, likely more so, for having chosen to live elsewhere, for failing to be present the last 10 months of her son's life. I understood this and wished her whatever comfort she could find. Still, for my part, these events left me cold. And I am not a cold man. At least at one time, I am not. I was not. And what I love about Isaac is he's recognizing right off the front there that he kind of is recognizing he is cold now, that he has the loss of this betrayal and loss of the second boy is Jonah is just, and so we sort of know what he's going to need to be dealing with as he's proceeding through this book. What comes after this is what the story is about. And he is, I'm not sure if we've mentioned this, he's Quaker. And that is a really very important part. And so when he says Daniel didn't consider himself Catholic, we understand that part of what has transpired between Daniel and Isaac relates to the Quaker faith as well. And so we do have to see this character struggle with both his son's relationship to his faith and his own relationship to his faith as the book progresses.
Yeah, and Isaac really is a man of few words. So when he does speak, it really carries a lot of weight, which I appreciated. And just the Quaker tradition of quiet reflection. It's unusual. It's not something you read about often. And tell us more about that and why you introduced that in the book.
Well, I am very, very, very interested in the Quakers, and I spent some time before I ever was working on this book. I went and spent a month living with Quakers in Pennsylvania at Pendle Hill, which is a learning and residential community. And it was such a moving and profound experience for me. It's a very, very different thing. I mean, Quakers, of course, are around all of us. We've had presidents that are Quaker. I mean, and so and they're normal people. But at this particular place, they had a culture that was very much about quiet listening. And if you spoke like in a social setting, it would not be uncommon for them not to respond right away. And when I was first there, I'm so used to everyone talking over each other and me talking over people that I thought, oh my God, I've done something inappropriate. I've said something awful. And then I realized, no, this is just, they actually listen to what you say, they reflect on it, and say something that responds to what you have raised. And I love that. And I wanted to think about that as I wrote my book. So I included that. And I also feel it's just something that the world could use more of. I mean, I certainly could use more of it. So I love putting it out there.
It made me think when I was a little girl, and actually my ancestry, there were some Quakers, way back, and we used to play Quakers meeting has begun. No laughing or talking shall be done. And then the first person to get the other person to laugh or talk lost. So anyway, that's a sidebar.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, we used to always play that as children. Anyway, tell us a little bit about Evangeline, because that girl she's inspiring. She's certainly dealt horrible things in her life, and maybe you can do a little reading about her as well, if you wouldn't mind.
I sure would love that. The Evangeline, I have to say, I love her. I mean, she's tough. She's not a warm, sweet girl in any way. And then, there's in my mind, a very important dog in this book. And at the beginning, she even thinks the dog is working a con on her. I mean, she is not going to trust anybody. No. That is what life has taught her. And she is definitely in survival mode. She's been abandoned by her mother. She is pregnant, and she is determined to survive and create some kind of life for her child, and she's hoping some kind of life better than what she had. And she's going to do whatever it takes. And so I'm going to read a little piece that we have met her at this point. This is chapter 4. We have met her, and we know that she knows she's pregnant. We know that she's living in this trailer out in the woods that her mom had moved her to about 6 months before. But then her mom, who had a drug addiction problem and some other things, abandoned her. And she just came home one day and her mom is gone. And here she is, 16. She's shortly thereafter, realizes she's pregnant, and she's alone in this trailer in the woods, and there's eviction notices, and the sheriff is about to show up. So she's out in an evening night in October, looking out over the town and trying to plot a course for herself, make a plan. So we're going to see the town of Port Furlong, which is a little town in the Olympic Peninsula, which bears a striking resemblance to where I live, which is Port Townsend, Washington. And so we'll start there. As she rounded a corner, the lights of town crept into view, strung along the shore below. When she'd arrived with her mother in the spring, Evangeline had thought the place was nothing more than a half dozen blocks of old buildings. But even from this modest elevation, you could see that it was much larger. Port Furlong fanned out for a few miles from a corner that jutted into the Sound, sprawled across multiple low-slung hills, surrounded a small lake. The Victorian settlers that had savaged the dense firs stripped the earth for their buildings and homes and family farms. Grand trees still stood in the parks and along rural roads, but in town, people had taken their place. 10,000 people, more in the summer, her mother had said. Now the whole of the town glittered, and Evangeline thought how this haunted old place woke each night, ghosts wandering the turrets and gables and widows' walks of the Victorian homes. Even downtown, with its massive brick courthouse and post office, with its finials and balustrades and rows of high arched windows, seemed to bustle with the shadows of century-old business deals, with stiffly dressed couples floating through brick walls, seeking marriage licenses or letters from across the sea. And beyond all this was the Sound, where she could feel as if tossing inside herself the sailboats and tugs and ferries that pitched in the water's black churn. Homes glowed on the hill above the town. She imagined the dinners and homework and family conversations taking place in those lighted rooms, and wondered if she would ever belong somewhere like that, in a house you could walk into day after day, knowing you were home, knowing you were wanted. No, she thought, she never would. Yet she touched her belly and whispered, "But you will, baby, you will."
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
I love her for that.
Yeah. Another character that's that everyone will love is Rufus. Rufus is the dog. And obviously you've known some good boys in your life, because this dog is a good boy. And there's a point I wrote down, Evangeline describes Rufus as 80 pounds of muscle. He used his body as a sponge to draw from me all that made me hurt. So Rufus, tell us about Rufus.
Well, okay, I will confess that Rufus is probably the only really autobiographical part of this book, because he's based on a real dog that happened to be named Hank. And Hank was that. He was 80 pounds of muscle, pit bull lab mix that had this innate ability to know when anyone in the house was not feeling well. I mean, he could be downstairs, and if my daughter got sad about something up in her room, he would go running upstairs and crawl into her lap, right? And once I had an architect at our house, and he hit his elbow, and he hit his funny bone, and he didn't make a sound, but his eyes teared up, and Hank came running down from upstairs and set his head in the guy's lap, right? He was just like this enlightened being, but he was also very much a dog, and he always had a runny nose, and he was very gassy, and he was definitely kind of a disgusting dog, but he was just really wonderful. And so I have always wanted to write about him, and this was just an opportunity to. I thought, of course, these guys would have dog, so I could write about my dog.
Everybody will love Rufus. There is guaranteed. And then, of course, Jonah. And Jonah, oh gosh, he's a really great character too. In fact, I had mentioned to people as well that this book, I don't know if you remember the book, The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold, which horrible things, happened to a young girl. But somehow there's still this goodness to the story, and there's hope. And so it sort of felt like that. And Jonah, there are chapters called The Day of My Death. It's the voice of anyway, go ahead and tell us more about Jonah and his voice too, perhaps.
Well, yes. And it was interesting because he was somebody that he was a character in the book for sure from the beginning, but he didn't have his own voice until a little bit later. And just became sort of clear to me that we needed to know things. I mean, let's put it this way. When you're writing, as long as I had been writing and not had to work really out in the world, you don't know that you ever will be. So I thought, well, what do I want to write about? What am I interested in? And I thought, I'm interested in this boy who did this absolutely horrific thing. And who is he? And why did this happen? And his voice just started coming up in me. And I was sort of resistant because I thought, oh, I don't know how to write you. But there he was. So I wrote him. And he's first person. He's speaking with his own voice. And he is speaking in the last 2 hours. I mean, he's dead when the book opens. Mm-hmm. Yet I sliced through the book as his thoughts as in the last 2 hours of his life. And so this is the first time we hear from him. The one thing you need to know when you hear this is he's going to refer to Red. And that is Evangeline. And because when he met Evangeline in the park with his friend Daniel, she was a little wary and she didn't give her real name. She just said, call me Red. And so he never knew her by any other name. So this is Jonah's voice, chapter 7, Day of My Death. It's 12:15 in the morning. I'll be dead in a few hours, or at the most. I'm not looking for pity. It's just how things are. I'm wearing leg-soled boots and canvas work pants, laying on top of my bed, a hard-sprung twin pressed against a wall. Something rattles and bangs outside. It's nothing, just the wind knocking over the rake. My mom and little sister are asleep in the rooms. I suppose Mom could be awake with a racket, but I doubt it, not after her long day. And I'd know if Nels was. If we took out a wall, our beds would be touching. They'll figure out later that I said goodbye to them a few hours back. It's been 10 days since I met Red. The first time she looked at me, all I could think was, now that girl's eyes can slice a guy wide open. There was this crazy relief in being seen like that and believing that Red knew me. Later, when her lips touched my cheek in front of Daniel, no less. It burned so much that spot had to be glowing like some holy tattoo. You couldn't touch that girl without feeling your skin had disappeared, that you'd turned to water and flowed into a warm ocean. I'd give anything to touch Red one last time, to place a fingertip at the pulse of her throat, feel her life there, right there, hot and beating and contained. She's alive, that girl. So much she still believes is possible. That's why I'm using these last few hours to figure things out. For her, she needs to know she's not to blame. I've only got my thoughts now, and I'm hoping that somehow they'll make their way to her. Not that I could begin to tell you in what world that would really happen, but it's pretty hard not to believe in unknown realms when that's exactly where you're heading. Mm-hmm. So that's poor Jonah in the few hours.
Poor Jonah, yeah.
Takes his life.
I also, another character sort of in this book is just the damp, rainy, chilly, dreary Pacific Northwest. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Oregon. I love the Pacific Northwest, but that is definitely the climate you're painting here for the book. And that's kind of a thread that runs through it as well. And what part does that play in the story? This sense of dread, this chilly, damp atmosphere.
One of the things, of course, this is my home, so I love it. But one of the things that I love about the Northwest and this locale is that it is both incredible. It's lush, right? It's lush with life. It's lush with rain and water. It's lush with, sometimes wind. It's just this lush life. And when it is beautiful, oh my gosh, so beautiful, right? The sun shining on the sound and the mountains and the trees. And there's all these animals in the water and all these animals in the forest and a lot of wildness around this. So it carries both this hope, but it also can be gloomy and scary and a little dangerous. I mean, we have cougars that run around here, I mean, there are, there's danger and I loved sort of it as an allegory for everything that they're dealing with, the sort of the wonder and the darkness and the light of their situation and of life in general. So I just enjoyed it as a setting.
That's great. Okay, so family can be biological, obviously, but in this case, it's more of like a beautiful accident that there's a family, because you weave these characters together. And Isaac is you describe him as someone who takes in all strays, the wet kittens he finds. Yeah. So tell us why that was a characteristic you wanted to give to Isaac.
And I don't feel this is giving much away, but because ultimately what I think it's on the book jacket. So he ultimately does take in Evangeline, who shows up on his property. And about a month after the boys have died, and he doesn't right away know her connection to the boys, but he takes her in. And I wondered, well, who is this man that would do that? But he was just a man who, Rufus, the dog, was a very sick and about to be put down dog at the shelter that he decided to take at the sort of the last minute and save. And actually Jonah, who was the next door boy, became very troubled in his adolescence, and in part because of some really big family trauma that he had, and kind of took him on almost as a second son and really tried to bring him into the Quaker faith. So he had a very profound approach to the world, that of believing that what the universe presents to him, there's a reason, and that he is called to offer care to what appears before him. And one of the reasons why this is essential in the book is because at the point the book opens, he feels like he's lost everything. His wife has divorced him the year before. His son is murdered by this other boy he considered like a son. And he needs this call. He has a call to action that the universe is giving him by presenting Evangeline.
And it also reminded me, I've seen bumper stickers on cars to promote pet rescue, and it says who rescued who, and that's I sort of felt like the same thing, because in this book there's so much pain, but there's so much serendipity too. And how did you do that? How do you balance that and make that all fit together so well?
You know what, I hesitate to say this because there is so much just work that goes into a book, but there's also so much mystery that goes into the writing of a book. And I am somebody who really, really believes in trusting the mystery of the story and writing to the mystery of the story. I did not have an outline for this book. I did not know how it was going to come out. I was like, who are these people? I would sit with them and go, who are you, Isaac? You know, he would sit in my office. And one time I remember he sat there like for 3 days and wouldn't talk to me, right? I was like, okay, I can wait you out. I'm going to sit here and edit some old pieces until you talk to me. And he kind of would, right? So I would say, yes, I think about it, but certainly in original drafting, I just trust that what I need will show up somehow on the page. And then it comes up and you look at it. And then the work of the more analytical mind comes into place. Like, how do you arrange it so it has the most drive and is the most accessible for a reader?
Well, that all makes it just such a beautiful book, and I can't wait to give it to my book club. The other thing that I really liked, there's a part where you say being seen, heard, and respected. That is really what can bring Evangeline like this promising future if this all works out. I mean, that just seems what we all need in this country. You know, when you look at things, being seen, heard, and respected, that's what we all need for emotional health. And I wondered if why that thread sort of runs through your story too.
Well, in my prior career as a mediator, and I had to deal, I mean, when I was doing these cases that involved, sexual abuse and things, I was often dealing with predators. I had to sit in the room with sometimes terrible predators, right? And I had to be able to see their humanity. That was required. I mean, just for practical purposes, if not for being a good person, if I wanted to get the case settled, they had to know that they were seen, they were heard, they were understood, that I saw them as more than these horrible things that they had done. And if I could do that, then we had a chance. If I couldn't see them anything other than just the single bad act or the multiple bad acts that they had done, then I'm done. They're not listening to a single thing I say. They're just out of there. So it was just, and I just feel like it's such a good practice, because I do really believe that there is a potential for grace in everyone, no matter what horror they have committed. And it doesn't mean that those acts are forgivable, but if you can see the humanity of the person that is more than those acts, I just feel like our world would be so much better.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a beautiful sentiment, because that's true. That's true. Mm-hmm. All right. Now I have some little quicker questions that I wanted to ask you. What are some formative books from your life that you've read and enjoyed and have stayed with you?
Oh my gosh. This is interesting, because actually the very first book that I super duper remember from when I was, in grade school was, of course, Little Women. And I've always liked those, those strong adolescent type characters. But as I've written, the writers, I will say the writers that I keep going back to again and again are like Marilyn Robinson, who wrote like The Gilead and Home and Housekeeping. Amazing, beautiful writer. I'm a huge Elizabeth Strout fan, with Olive Kitteridge and all of her books. I'm a huge Alice Munro fan. What amazes me about her is that she can write about the same kind of basic small town in Canada and a pretty everyday events, and yet you come out feeling like you've learned something about humanity. And another person that's been kind of formative for me, and I doubt people really see that in my work, but I can feel the presence in a different way, is George Saunders, who really is awesome, because his work, he goes very dark, but there's so much humanity in his work, and I adore him, and I adore his work. And he also can go kind of mystical in his work, and he's a Buddhist. And so those are the people that I would say have really influenced me. And then there are just books that I feel like there's a lot of atonement that is in my book, where people are trying to like sort of atone. And I realized just last night at an event when someone was asking me about this, and I go, oh, one of my all-time favorite books is Atonement by Ian McEwan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that's a topic that interests me.
Interesting. Yeah, because Little Women, you've got a strong adolescent girl, or young woman, and then Atonement. There you go. No wonder you sort of amalgamated everything into your work now. Did you have anyone who inspired you as you were growing up to be a writer?
Not really. Well, let's put it this way. I will confess to this. When I was like probably 10, I won a statewide poetry competition, but I won it because my mom wrote the poem, right? And I did not.
We won't tell anyone. No.
Right. And so I have this picture of me looking pretty bleak in the paper because I did not write this poem that I won the award for, right? So but I would say, it's odd, the little things that stick in your head. In middle school, I remember writing this piece that for whatever reason, and I just wrote it off. I actually wanted to be an artist, so I did tons of artwork, right? And but I wrote this little piece in a middle school English class, and that instructor was just very, very praising of it. And it's interesting because that always stuck in my head, right? And it makes you realize that we do not know if we say some kind thing to somebody just as we walk through their life, I think you don't know when it sticks in their head, and people hold on to that and it becomes something later.
That's right. Plant a seed. That's great. Mm-hmm. And what are you reading now?
Well, one of the things I just finished reading, which I really enjoyed, is Miracle Creek by Angie Kim. And it's a thriller, and she was a lawyer too. And we actually have the same agent, and we actually are dealing with very similar things. Her book, I think, is a much more of a traditional thriller. There's a very complicated and riveting plot in a way that I think my book doesn't really aim to do. But she's also dealing with, I feel like one of the things I'm trying to do for myself as a writer is expand my own empathetic imagination. And I hope that a reader might feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like my heart's opened a little bit with regard to people that it might not have been before. And I really felt that with Angie Kim's work. So there's that. I am I'm also reading a number of books related to memoirs by women surgeons, because the next thing I'm working on involves a woman surgeon.
That's my next question. And what is your next project? What are you working on now?
Well, I'm not a big believer, because I work really organically, and because things change, and because I believe in getting a project to some kind of full form before I really decide what it is. I'm not speaking too much about it, but I'm not giving too much away to say that it will be about a woman surgeon.
Okay, that's great.
Well, I'm almost certain have a cougar.
Oh.
In it, because I have this thing for cougars.
Will it be set in the Pacific Northwest as well?
Probably in Seattle.
Seattle, okay. And also I didn't really talk to you about, you said you'd never had an outline. And so what is how is your writing process? I mean, do you work early in the morning, late at night? Did you have a particular schedule? You said you didn't do an outline, any kind of storyboard?
Well, I take that. I mean, I take it back. I had an outline for my book, but when I was in my MFA program, MFA advisor took my outline and wadded it up and threw it in the trash. And she said, "How can you possibly know what your book is about and she said, "You're being very in your lawyer mind. Get out of your lawyer mind, right?" And it's right, because when you're writing a brief for law, you would never like sit down to write it not going, oh, I wonder how it'll come out, right? No,
Yeah.
I always know exactly where you're going.
Sure.
And so she convinced me. She was always saying, right into the mystery. She was very Yoda-like. And so I thought, okay, what the hell? Why not? Right. So that's what I did. So I threw it out and I just started writing. And I wrote a lot. I worked very hard through my MFA program. I am not someone that is, I tend to be a bit of a binge writer where I might write, 16 hours a day. I mean, and then not write, right? And write really intensely for chunks of time and then need time to get away. That's just my nature in general. I tend to dive into things and then need a break.
Would you want any part of you want to share this book with past clients that you had? I mean, is there any of that you might, when you think about the young people they were pretty traumatized, I imagine. I don't know whether this would be an encouragement to anyone that you've met along the way.
I don't know. And I guess how I have the same kind of feeling about it being out in the world. I sort of have faith that it will find the people that it needs to find. And I hope it does.
Right. Well, I hope it does. Yeah. I think that's great. I'm so grateful that you did this and that you had some time tonight to sit down and talk with us and our
fun. Thank
customers. You. Yeah, it's really a great book. Everybody should read it. Get your hands on this book. Have all of your book clubs take part in, because there's just so many layers and so many things about it are just like I said, heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time.
I have to say, when you were reading Jonah's passage, his chapter, talk about a knife into the heart. And when you said that the only autobiographical character is Rufus, the dog, and then you read Jonah's part, I'm like, how did you not know a Jonah? Like, you just did, from what I heard, you just did this amazing job breathing life into these characters. And so I just have a hard time believing that, they weren't real people, because they just seem to jump off the page. And Candy, you read it, so you can attest to that.
They're incredible. It's just great.
Yeah.
It's.
And I have to say that I was very happy that I remembered to actually mute myself when you were talking about, the potential for grace and, being able to see each other's humanity, right? That, let's not see the differences. Let's not see what we've done, but we have to remember that we're all part of the humanity. Because I actually hit the desk and shouted yes. I was like, oh yeah, I'm muted. Okay, good.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an important message for people to keep in mind. And there are so many high schoolers that I would love to give this book to. Do you think that this is going to be a good crossover to the high school market? In full disclosure, I'm the children's manager at Downers. So I'm always looking for those adult books that can cross over to the young adult market.
I have to say, it's definitely got some trigger issues for some people, right? And it has some dark elements, but having worked with so many adolescents, I can tell you their lives either personally are dark, or they know of people who have had really dark things happen. That is reality.
Yes.
I just feel so strongly that is reality.
Yes.
And that is why I wrote this book, because I was like, I don't want to distract from reality. This is reality. The question is, how do we survive it, right? How do we get to this grace and this connection? And so I'd love to see it in high schools and things. And my sister-in-law happens to be vice principal in a high school, and she's already has it in her school. So yay.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
When you sat down to write this book, did you envision this as an adult book? Because I'm always so intrigued by those authors, whether they're children's authors or adult authors. Most of the time they're like, I just wrote a story that was speaking to me, that needed me to tell it. And I didn't envision it to be a kid's book, or I didn't necessarily envision it that it was going to be an adult book. Did you have, kind of a path or a plan when you wrote?
I would say I'm in that first category. I just wrote it, and I thought, because sometimes I know even if you have a single character that's an adolescent, that the people immediately assume that it's YA, right?
Right.
Honestly, I love if people think it's YA. That's great. I mean, because I think it is very adult, but there are tons of people, tons of kids. I would have, I think I would have loved to read a book like this when I was in certainly in my mid to late teens. So yes, I hope so. That's anyway. But no, I didn't. In my own head, I was like, I'm more like curious, like where will people put it? And I did see a review that included it as a YA as well as adult.
Okay. Do you ever see yourself writing a traditional young adult novel in the future?
I don't know what a traditional YA book is.
I guess that probably wasn't the best choice of words, but it's sitting down and writing an intentional young adult novel. Maybe that's
probably not. Just because that is just, I find that when I intend to do anything, it's not good. I really just have to not intend anything and just see what happens.
Right.
Yeah, I know how that goes.
Well, it worked out well this time.
Exactly. Exactly.
Doesn't always, but sometimes, right?
Yeah. I think I'm going to be taking a book home tonight to start this. I can't wait.
Absolutely.
I cannot wait to get my hands on it. Well, unless anybody has any questions, I mean, Candy and I could sit here and hog the entire conversation for the rest of the time. And as entertaining as I like to think I am,
yes,
I know that that's not always, thank you. I know that that's not always the case. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. But JoAnne, I really cannot wait to read the book myself, but I think this is going to be one that both Candy and I are just going to love putting in the hands of readers.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, that's what I need. Thank you.
And I think even more importantly, Candy, it's going to be one that I'm going to love putting in other staff members' hands to help them, right?
It's a great book. I mean, it sticks with you because, well, we can't tell you all the things that happen.
Yes.
So I'm trying to dance around it, but it's like I've said, it has some hard, dark parts and some just beautiful, enlightening parts, So
basically what you're saying is it's going to rip my heart out.
Yes.
It's going to stomp all over it and tear it up into little pieces.
And there's a good dog.
Patch it all back together. Okay. All right.
There's somebody said something.
Yeah. So Susan Smith says, I have read the book and it is excellent. Thank you, JoAnne, for sharing tonight. It was very interesting.
Hey, Susan. She's a friend of mine, I should confess.
Thank you, Susan.
Yes, thank you, Susan. Yeah. Well, I can't wait to sink my teeth into this book. So JoAnne, thank you so much for giving us a book that, we're just going to love to share. And basically, thank you for making our job easy. It's really drill down to what it is. So
yeah. And see, Kathleen, why I was so happy that I got my hands on it early.
Yeah. Here's some more salt for that wound. Go ahead.
Yes.
Play favorite. Whatever.
Right.
It's fine. It's fine. All right. Well, again, thank you so much, everybody, for coming tonight. JoAnne, again, thank you so much for this book that we are just going to be super excited about. For those of you that opted to pick up the book in store, I think they will shoot you an email or give you a call when books are ready to be picked up. For those of you that opted to have the book shipped to you, those will be sent out ASAP. And for those of you that still need to get your hands on the books, we've got them in both stores. So pop on in to your closest Andersons. And also don't forget that Saturday is Indie Bookstore Day. So it's, party. Yeah, exactly. So wait till Saturday. Come and grab the book, celebrate Indie Bookstore Day with us with a great new novel, JoAnne's new novel. And I think that'll be the great way to start a weekend. So
right. And JoAnne, hopefully you can come to see us in person with the paperback edition, and then we'll even have more fun then.
That would be wonderful. I hope so. All right.
Okay, dibs. I get her. She comes If she calls
Okay.
live, dibs and
All right.
downers.
Okay.
Dibs and downers.
Okay. All right. I'll make a note of it.
Okay. Yeah. Look at, she's like, I'll make a note of it. Eye rolling. All right. Well, JoAnne, again, thank you so much
Thank
for
you
this book.
both.
Thank you for
Thanks,
joining
JoAnne.
us. Yeah. And
Really
everybody,
enjoyed it.
yeah, that came tonight. Thank you all so much for being here, because without your support, we wouldn't be able to have authors like JoAnne. We wouldn't be able to bring these books to you. You guys are what make that wheel go round. So thank you so very much for everything you guys do to support us and to support our wonderful authors like JoAnne. So everybody have a great evening. I know in the Chicago area, we're supposed to have some good weather coming up. So I don't know about where you are,
Yay.
JoAnne. So, all right.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you all
Bye.
so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.